Hi and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to continue working on the window frame. First of all, I want to make this invisible and select the door blade again. We still have these polygon loops selected here, and since we don't really need these polygons, let's go ahead and delete them. And I'm going to drag this door blade into the door null object. Now let's select this window frame again, make it visible. And I want to scale this window frame on the z-axis, and before we do that, let's make sure that the object axis is centered on the frame. Okay, and now we can scale this window frame on the z-axis. Activate the scale tool, click and drag on the blue handle to make this a bit bigger, and I'm going to use a size of 7.5 here. Now let's go to the polygon mode, right click and extrude. I'm going to extrude this with a maximum angle of 90 degrees. I'm using an offset of -3.5, and we want to create caps and also make sure that preserve groups is activated again. Apply these settings and then hit Ctrl A to select all of the polygons. Then go to functions, reverse normals. And next let's go to the edge mode and select the edges for beveling. And I'm going to use the loop selection tool here to select these edge loops. And maybe I'll make this door invisible for the time being. And I also want to select these edges down here. And these ones over there. And these ones up there, and we also need these two, and these ones down here. Okay, so let's save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Next, let's go to the polygon mode and select these two polygons here. Right click, split them off, and I'm going to drag this window frame into the door null object. I'm going to rename this one to door window pane, and let's get rid of this selection tag. And I'm using axis center again to center the object axis. And next I'm going to select, let's go to the edge mode and select these four edges here. Right click, edge cut, and I'm going to use one subdivision. And now let's select these new edges. Right click and extrude them. And if you enter an offset of say 20 here, you can see that these edges are extruded along the z-axis. But we want to extrude them along the y-axis. So let's undo this, and I'm going to use an offset of 0 for this extrusion. And let's make sure that snapping is deactivated here. And now we can simply move the new edges up on the y-axis like so. Let's select these edges here and delete them. Okay, now if I make the door visible again, you can see that this was an easy way of placing these window panes exactly in the center, at the center of the window frame. I'm going to select these edges, again switch to the front view, and let's move these edges up to close the holes here. So I'm going to bring these up to about here maybe. Okay. And these are the window panes. Now let's make a copy of this object, and I'm going to call this one door window grid. Let's drag this door window pane into the door null object. And that's it for this lesson. In the next bit we're going to make the door window grid. So see you then. Thanks for watching, and bye bye. Hi and welcome back. In this part we're going to model the window grid. And what we should do before we start working on the window grid is select the window pane, go to the polygon mode, hit Ctrl A. I'm going to reverse the normals. Okay, let's do the same thing for this window grid. Go to Functions, Reverse Normals. Okay, now I'm going to make this door invisible. And let's go to the front view and go to the edge mode. I'm going to select these edges here, then right click, Edge Cut, and I'm using an offset of 50% with one subdivision and no n-gons. Apply these settings, then I'm going to select these two new edges, make the door visible, and let's make sure that that snapping is deactivated here. And I'm going to move these edges up to about here, where this rounded corner starts. Next I'm going to select these edges here. Again, right click, Edge Cut, and this time I'm going to use two subdivisions. And let's use the rectangle selection tool to select these edges, and I'll change the size to 25. And these edges I'm going to change the size to 25 as well, like so. Now let's select all of these new edges here, right click and bevel them, and I'm going to use an inner offset of 1.5. Now let's switch to the polygon mode, delete the selected polygons here, then go to the point mode, and none of these points are selected, so we can go straight to Functions, Optimize, and hit OK, and this will get rid of these points in the middle of nowhere here. Okay, now let's go back to the polygon mode and right click, extrude these polygons, deactivate caps, and I'm going to use an offset of 2 meters. Okay, you can see that this window grid sticks out of the door blade a bit, so I'm going to bring these polygons here down a bit, or these points rather. Let's switch to the point mode, go back to the front view, and I'm going to use the rectangle selection tool. Make sure that only select visible elements is deactivated, and select all of these points here and move them down a tiny bit so that these points are hidden behind the window frame. And now I'm going to deselect these points. Okay, and move these points down a bit more, like so. And I'm going to deselect these points and move them down a bit more until they're hidden behind this frame. Okay, and now let's make this door invisible again. Go to the polygon mode. Let's get rid of some of the polygons that we don't need here. I'm going to select these at the top, and these ones, and these ones over here, and these bottom polygons. Okay, and delete them. And now let's go back to the edge mode. Most of the edges that we need for beveling are already selected, and just in case they're not, let's go to the front view here, and I'm using the loop selection tool with stop at boundary edges selected. Now we can select these edges here, and as with the window grid on the other windows, I'm going to select these edges here, and again these edges will make the mesh look a little better when we bevel these edges. And let's see, we also need to select these edges here. and these ones down here. And these ones. And these ones down here. Okay, let's save this selection and rename it to Edges for Beveling. I'm going to make a copy of this. If you want to bevel the edges, right click Bevel. We're going to bevel these by 0.05 maybe. Bring the Phong angle down a bit. And if you want, you can do the same thing that I showed you for the window grids on the other windows to clean up the mesh a bit. Go to the point mode, use the live selection to select these 2 points, then go to Structure, Weld, and just left click somewhere in the viewport to weld these points in the middle, like so. Then hit the spacebar to switch back to the live selection tool. Select these 2 points, hit the spacebar again, weld these points, and do the same thing over here. Okay, now let's go to the front view. I'm going to switch the display to lines here and select this point as a reference. Okay, copy the Y position, then select these 2 points here and paste the Y position. I'm going to select this point here as a reference, and again copy the Y position, then select these 2 points and paste the Y position. And now let's select this point as a reference, copy the X position, and select these 2 points and paste the X position, like so. Okay, and now let's select this point and again copy the X position, and then select these 2 points here and paste the X position. Okay, and again like that we get clean bevels and a perfect mesh. And of course you'd have to do the same thing for these 3 areas here. Okay, I'm going to delete this object. And now let's see. Let's drag this door window grid into the door null object. Make this visible. Then I'm going to select the door blade, go to the polygon mode, and select these polygons here. Right click, split them off. I'm going to drag this new object out of the door null object, make the door invisible, go to the point mode, select this point as a reference. This one is positioned at -20 on the x-axis. I'm going to select this point and move it over to -20 on the x-axis, and the same thing over here. This one's positioned at -20 on the x-axis, so we're going to bring this point to 20 meters on the x-axis as well. Now let's go to the polygon mode, hit Ctrl A, then right click, melt these polygons, go back to the point mode, select these points and delete them, and hit Ctrl A to select all of the points. And I'm going to change the size on the x-axis to 8. Okay, let's make the door visible again. Go back to the polygon mode, right click, extrude these polygons, and I'm going to use an offset of 2 meters without caps. Apply, make the door invisible again, and select this polygon up here and this one down there. Delete them, go to the edge mode and select these two edges and save this selection. Rename it to edges for beveling. Okay, let's rename this object to, let's see, door intermediate piece. Okay, drag it into the door null object and make the door visible again. And if you want to, you could drag some materials onto here. I'm going to use this white stone material for the intermediate piece, for the door window grid, the door window frame, and let's see, for the door frame. And I'm going to use this glass material for the window pane. Okay, and this is how our door looks so far. That's it for this part. In the next bit we're going to model the last component for the ground floor, which will be the door mounting and the door knob. Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi, in this part we're going to do the door mounting, and we'll start by making this door invisible. And now let's create a disk object. And I want to change the settings for this disk object. So in the attribute manager, go to the object tab, and I'm going to bring the outer radius to 30 for now, and let's bring the disk segments down to 1 and reduce the rotation segments to 12. And I want to change the orientation to +Z. Now let's go to the front view, hit O on the keyboard and make this object editable. Next I want to select these edges here, right click and extrude them. And if you left click and drag in the viewport, you can see how these edges are extruded, and this is not what I want. I need these edges to come straight down. So let's undo this and right click, extrude these edges again, and this time use an offset of 0. Apply, and now we can simply move these new edges down on the y-axis like so. And we could also align them by entering 0 in the field for the y-axis under size in the coordinate manager, and apply this. Now let's move these down a bit more, and I think that this bottom part is still a bit wide, so what I'm going to do is go back and select this edge here, then right click, select edge cut, and I'm going to use an offset of 70% with one subdivision, and I want to create n-gons. Apply this, and now we should have a new point here. Let's go back to the edge mode and select this edge over here, right click and select edge cut again, and this time I want an offset of 30%, again one subdivision and n-gons. Apply this, and now we should have a point over here and one over here. So let's go back to the edge mode and select these edges, right click and extrude them by 0, and then move these edges down, align them on the y-axis and move them down a bit more. And this is going to be our keyhole. Next let's go to the polygon mode, and I'm going to switch the display to Gouraud shading lines. Hit Ctrl A to select all of the polygons, go to functions, reverse normals, and then right click and melt these polygons, and go to the edge mode and use the loop selection. Make sure that stop at boundary edges is deactivated. Then select these edges, go to Structure, Edit Spline, Edge to Spline, and this will create this new spline object here. I'm going to drag this out of here and delete the disk object. And let's go to the point mode, select the disk spline, and I'm going to delete these points here. We only need these 2 points down here to define this straight line. And I think I'm also going to move these 2 points down on the y-axis a bit to smooth the transition between this rounded part here and the straight part down here. Okay, so next let's create a rectangle spline, and I'm going to change the settings for this spline. Let's make this a width of 300 and a height of 1100. And I also want to activate rounding here and bring the radius up to about 70. Let's make this spline editable and select both the rectangle spline and the disk spline. Right click and connect these two. Delete the original splines. Now let's select our new spline, and I'm going to bring these points down a bit to here maybe. And make sure that this rectangle spline is selected, and then press and hold the Alt key and create an extrude NURBS object, and this will automatically make this rectangle spline a child of the extrude NURBS. And of course this extrude NURBS creates a movement or thickness, which I don't want right now, so in the attribute manager go to the object tab and change the movement to 0 to get this flat object. And before I make this object editable, I want to change the settings for the spline to reduce the amount of detail that we get on these roundings here. And I'm going to bring this angle up to about 15 degrees. And now let's select the extrude NURBS object, make it editable. Let's get rid of this polygon selection tag and rename this to door mounting base. Let's go to the polygon mode, hit Ctrl A and reverse the normals. And again we have an n-gon here, and I want to remove this n-gon. If you use functions remove n-gons, you can see that we don't get a very nice looking mesh, and also we have these tiny polygons down here and edges, several edges that meet in one point. This is going to give us trouble when we bevel the edges on this object. So I'm going to undo this, go to the point mode, right click and activate the knife tool. I'm going to use the same settings here that I used for cutting the ground floor wall. So restrictor selection should be deactivated. We want to create n-gons, and I'm using the constraint option here with an angle of 90 degrees. On the snap settings tab, enable snapping. Make sure that the type is set to snap 2.5D, and I'm going to snap to points, and maybe I'll bring this snapping radius down a bit to 30. Okay, and so now let's make our first cut from here to here and one from here to here. I'm going to cut here and over here, and down here I'm going to cut from here to here and from here to here. Then let's make another cut here and one over here, and one from here to here, and another one over here. And let's see, I think we could cut from here to here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, let's undo this. Let's leave it like that, and instead make another cut from this center point up to here, and cut from here to here, and from this point to here. Okay, and now let's use functions remove n-gons to get rid of the remaining n-gons. And we have some triangles here in this part, but it's going to be okay. When we bevel the edges here, we can bring the Phong angle down a bit to get rid of the creases. And now what I want to do is align some of these points. So let's use the rectangle selection tool. I'm going to select this horizontal row here, and this one is aligned perfectly, so we don't have to do anything here. Now let's select these points and bring the size to 0 on the y-axis. Again, I'm going to do the same thing here. Just make sure that this point in the center is deselected. Set the size to 0. And I'm not going to use any specific values and copy and paste these around. But just selecting these points and setting the size to 0, we're not going to change the shape of this keyhole, so it's okay to do it like that. Let's check this row of points, and this one is aligned, so we don't have to do anything here. And I want to select this point as a reference, and this one is positioned at -15 on the x-axis. So let's select these 2 points, bring them to -15, and align them on the x-axis this time. And these two have to be at 15, and again I'm going to align these. And these two in the middle have to be positioned at 0, and the size has to be 0 again. Okay, and that's all we need to do here. Now we can extrude this object. So let's go to the polygon mode, right click and extrude these polygons. I don't want to create caps here, and I'm using an offset of 50. And this looks about alright. Now let's go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges here and these edges, and I also want to select this one and this one over here. I'm going to save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Okay, and I'm going to do a quick test and bevel these edges. I'm going to make a copy of this door mounting base, make the original invisible, so we can delete this copy later on and we don't have to go back all the steps to the unbeveled edges. Now right click and bevel these edges, and I'm going to use an inner offset of 1. Bring the Phong angle down a bit to 38. Now let's go to the point mode and see whether we have to clean anything up here. Looks okay, but over here we could use the live selection tool to select these 2 points and go to structure weld and weld them to this point, and do the same thing over here, weld them to this point. Now let's select these 2 new points, go to the front view and get a little closer here. We'll have to scale these a bit on the x-axis to get an even bevel, like so. Okay, and let's check down here. I think we need to scale these 2 apart. Let's select this point as a reference, copy the X position and paste it down here, and do the same thing for this point, paste the same value and just make sure that it's positive. Okay, so now we have even bevels here. And if you want to be absolutely precise, you could also select this point as a reference, copy the Y position, and then select these points and these points, paste the Y position. Okay, and this is how the object would look with beveled edges. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to delete this copy again and make this door mounting base visible. And that's it for this part. In the next bit we're going to make the doorknob. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi, in this lesson we're going to make the doorknob, and I want to create a sphere for that. And I'm going to move this sphere over to here. Okay, to about here maybe. And also want to bring it up a bit to about here. Yeah, that looks alright. And let's see, in the attribute manager, go to the object tab, and I want to increase the radius to about 140, and I'll bring the segments down to 12. Okay, now let's make this sphere editable and activate the rotate tool, and then press and hold the shift key, and then click and drag on this red handle and rotate this sphere by 90 degrees so that the original poles face in this direction. Now let's go to the object axis tool and reset the object axis to 0, like so. And next I want to go to the right view, hit O on the keyboard, and maybe scale this sphere down a bit on the z-axis, like so. Go to the edge mode and use the rectangle selection tool, select these edges, scale these a bit more, just click and drag in the viewport to scale these edges on all three axes, like so. And I think that looks okay. Yep. Let's go back to the right view, go to the polygon mode and use the rectangle selection tool again to select these polygons. Right click and extrude them, and I'm going to extrude these with an offset of 0. Okay, and then move them back on the z-axis. Let's undo this. We have to deactivate snapping here. Now let's move these back a bit and then align them on the z-axis. Let's make this door mounting base invisible. Go to the point mode, and I'm going to select this point here and delete it. Go back to the right view, make the door mounting base visible again, and select these points here and move them back to the door mounting base, like so. Okay, right now we have very little detail on this doorknob, and maybe I'll bring this up a bit. Okay, and if you want to have more detail for your render, you could use a hyperlapse object. So let's create a hyperlapse object and make this sphere a child of the hyperlapse. I'm going to rename this to doorknob. Let's rename this to doorknob as well. Okay, now you can see that we have a very round object, and if you get a little closer and render this, you can also see that we have these little grooves here, and this is why you shouldn't use triangles when you use hyperlapse. Let's go to the front view and switch the hyperlapse off, select the doorknob, go to the polygon mode. This is a problem that we can fix very easily. Let's use the live selection tool, select these two polygons, and go to functions, melt. Okay, and I'm going to do this for the other polygons here too, only this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is UZ, to speed things up a bit. Okay, select these two, melt them, and these, and these, and these. Now if we go to the perspective view, switch the hyperlapse back on and render this, you can see that we don't have these grooves anymore. And also, if we use hypernubs, we should define this edge a bit better here. So let's switch the hypernubs back off again. Go to the edge mode and let's use the loop selection tool to select these edges here. Right click and bevel them. And this time I want to use one subdivision, and I want to switch the type to convex. And now just left click and drag on the viewport, and I'm going to use an offset of 3, maybe 3.5. Okay, and if we switch the hypernubs back on and render this, we now have an edge that looks much nicer. Okay, and I think I'm going to bring this hypernubs detail down a bit in the subdivision editor. Let's make this 1. And what I want to create next is another object that's supposed to be the mounting for this doorknob. And first of all, I want to select this doorknob, go to the model tool and use axis center to center the axis on this object. And now I want to create a cylinder. Okay, I'm going to move this forward a bit, and I'm going to call this doorknob mounting. And in the attribute manager, go to the object tab, and I want to change the orientation to +Z, bring the height segments down to 1, and reduce the rotation segments to maybe 20. And also on the caps tab, bring the cap segments down to 1. And next we have to position this object in the center of the doorknob, and we can easily do that by going to Functions, Transfer. And now let's drag this doorknob from the Object Manager down to here in the Attribute Manager into this field, and then hit Apply, and this will position the doorknob mounting in the center of our doorknob. Okay, now let's move this new object back a bit. Select it again, and in the Attribute Manager I'm going to change the height to about 15 and move this back a bit more to here, and I want to bring the radius up to, let's see, maybe 85. Okay, and this looks about okay. And now let's select the doorknob and the door mounting base, hit Alt-G on the keyboard to place these in a null object, and I'm going to call this door mounting and make this invisible. Next, let's select the door knob mounting, make it editable, go to the point mode, then go to Functions, Optimize, and hit OK, and this will reduce the number of points from 82 to 42. Now let's delete this point here at the back. Go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges. Save the selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Okay, and let's move this into the null object here, into the door mounting null object. And I want to add one last detail. We're going to have some screws to fix this door mounting to the door blade. And again, I'm going to use a cylinder, and in the Attribute Manager, let's change the settings. First of all, I want to move it forward a bit. Change the orientation to +Z again, and bring the height segments down to 1, and I'm going to reduce the rotation segments to 6. I don't want very much detail here. And on the caps tab again, bring the cap segments down to 1. Let's move this up a bit, and I'm going to reduce the font shading to 43, and let's see, let's bring the radius down to 20 maybe, and reduce the height to 10. Okay, now let's move this back to here and to here. And maybe just for now I'm going to apply this glass material to this screw. Let's rename this to screw. Okay, go to the front view, and let's see, I think I want to bring this a bit down and over to here, and maybe a bit up again. Okay, and now let's make this door mounting invisible. Select the screw, make it editable, go to the point mode, use functions optimize to get rid of all of the overlapping points here, and this will reduce the number of points to 14. And again, let's delete this point at the back of the object. Go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges. Save the selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Now let's go back to the model tool and make the door mounting visible again. Let's make copies of this screw and position it on the door mounting. So I'm going to make one copy, and since we modeled this object in the center of the Cinema 4D grid, we just have to change this value on the x-axis by making it positive. Okay, apply, and this should move our copy over to here. And now let's copy these two screws and make the position on the y-axis negative. Apply this, and this will position these copies down here. And I'm going to select the 4 screws, hit Alt G, and rename the null object to screws. Put it in the door mounting null object, and now let's say activate the move tool. We have to scale this object down, and first of all I want to center the object axis here, so I'm using axis center, and this time we need to activate include children and use all objects. Hit execute, and now if we scale this object down on all 3 axes, everything will scale evenly. Okay, I also want to move this over to minus 350 on the x-axis and to minus 1300 on the z-axis to position it roughly where the door is. And let's make this door in the ground floor visible. Okay, then activate the scale tool and just click and drag in the viewport and scale this door mounting down. Okay, let's zoom in a little and move this up and back a bit, and we need to scale it some more. I'm going to move it over a bit and back a bit. Okay, and this is still a bit large, I think, so let's scale it again. Okay, and I think this looks about right. Let's move this up to 100 on the y-axis. Do a quick test render here. Maybe apply this dark glass material to the door mounting so we can see a little better how it looks. Maybe I'll bring this back to 95 again on the y-axis. Okay, and if you want to, you can make a copy of this door mounting and rename the first one to door mounting right and the second one to door mounting left, and I'm going to move this over to here, and maybe adjust the position of this one a bit, move it over to here a bit, so that it's roughly in the center between these two white areas here. Okay, and now let's select the two door mountings, hit Alt G to place them in a null object, and I'm going to rename this to door mountings and make this a child of the door null object, and make the door a child of the ground floor, like so. And now let's make this ground floor ceiling visible again. And I want to do one last thing here, and that is select the ground floor ceiling, go to the polygon mode, select this top polygon and move it up to 52 by 10 units on the y-axis. I think it looks a little better if we make this a bit thicker. Okay, and now let's see how this looks. Let's do a quick test render. And this concludes the first big chapter of this tutorial. So now we're finished with the ground floor, and in the next bit we're going to move up in the world and start working on the first floor. So thanks for watching this, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.